Hi everybody, it's Screwyioux here, aka Jake, with another Dominion coaching video. If anybody is not familiar, the premise is that we record these games of Dominion and then we watch them back and analyze them to see what the players did right and what the players did wrong, and how we can all learn from that to get better at the game. And it's mostly about just using the luxury of hindsight to help make a cool video about Dominion that helps us all get better. So this video comes submitted to us from Mr. Srmccorkle, and I think that the board and the game that plays out is actually really interesting. So we'll get into that later on. But I do want to point out that we are going to have some contact info in the description of this video if you want to record one of your own games and submit it for this series. And we're always happy to take new content and make another coaching video out of it. So let's go ahead and take a look at this board. You are analyzing things and you're reading it and deciding how to open. And
I would not have chosen
let's
this
go
using
ahead
if I would have understood how this had any
here,
rage.
because you take some time to plan out your opening two buys. The opponent has opened nothing, and you're looking at the kingdom. You remark that there is no village effect, so that's important. That is one of the things you're going to start out looking for, and that there's no plus buy. So there are extra gains here. Vampire can gain things that aren't victory cards, but there's no way to buy more than one province in a turn. And there's also junking, and there's trashing. There's junking attacks that cost 5, and there's trashing that costs less than 5. So you're thinking about what to do here.
Awesome source of draw. I mean, I guess
you say there's no awesome source of draw. I am going to disagree with you there. We do have Caravan. So there's no village effect, but the Caravan is a really good source of non-terminal draw, and you actually start thinking about the split of the Caravans later on before you buy anything, and that is a really good thought, because in a lot of ways the split would be really important in this game, because it's the only way to increase your hand size in a way that's productive for your turns.
So anyways, we'll get moving. He opened.
So the opponent has gone ahead and taken a banquet to get a soothsayer. So you are now thinking about what you want to do. You've identified that one of your early priorities is to hit 5, and I think that that's really correct. But let's go into why, and let's go into how you accomplish it. So I think that this game is pretty important for Groundskeepers. In the end, if you can keep your deck clean of junk and play a bunch of Groundskeepers every turn, which is possible because you can gain a bunch of them really quickly with Vampire, you can outscore really anything else that the opponent could do, because the opponent, even though you can't buy multiple green cards per turn, which Groundskeeper loves to do, the opponent can't empty provinces quickly enough for Groundskeepers points not to just completely bury them if they don't go for Groundskeepers. So the opponent has gone for a Soothsayer, and that is going to junk you and help them to hit 5, and that is something to consider. You have decided that you really want to hit 5, and you end up going with Steward Caravan. That makes sense to a degree, because you get to focus on the Caravan split you were worried about, and you have the Steward, which trashes cards, but I think you can do better. There is the possibility of opening gear, and if you do open gear, you kind of get the best of all worlds. You get to pretty much definitely hit 5, and you get to very likely play your Steward to trash estates, which is what it wants to do. We can go ahead and link Akuchi's article on gear in the description here to go into the specifics of why it's so good, but suffice it to say, if you had opened gear instead of the Caravan, you would have had a much higher shot of hitting 5, and you would have probably been far ahead in other ways, because gear is really good in the first 2 shuffles.
I think banqueting those.
So you go ahead, like I said, and buy the Caravan.
Copper, no village, so that's my concern.
You've remarked that he has
Earlier,
Steward Soothsayer, and that terminal collision is going to be a problem for him potentially, and you're right about that. That is potentially something he needs to worry about.
And then Steward. Well, I think that actually went pretty well.
So,
but my vampire helps me gain caravan. I'll draw
what to do. You did go ahead and pick up that caravan with your Steward. Again, I think it should have been a gear, but you know, you are looking at turn 3. You've got Steward with 2 estates. That's really good.
Feel free to speak into that.
And your opponent has gotten a cultist. So your opponent has at this point kind of declared the deck that he's building and trying to win the game with. He's got a Soothsayer, and he's got a cultist. He is pretty locked into a big money slog at this point. So he is going to be trying to bury you in curses and ruins and gain gold so that he can buy provinces one by one while you're still recovering from that junk. The junk doesn't hurt you forever because you can trash it, but his win condition with this opener is to fill his deck with golds and buy provinces really early so that he gets a lead on you and then either piles out or empties the provinces if you try to race him. I think that loses pretty hard to a deck that keeps itself clean of junk with Steward and Vampire and focuses on Groundskeepers, but you do need to know to do that, and you need to play into your own win condition, not into his. So, you go ahead and trash your estates, and I think most of your play is pretty reasonable here up until we get to this point.
I love trashing, but I think...
So, you're looking at a hand of Steward, 4 coppers, and a vampire. And you've only got the 1 vampire. I am going in a couple of different directions with this hand. You could play the Steward to trash 2 coppers, and then you could play your vampire to gain a 5 cost, like maybe a caravan or a groundskeeper. Those would both be pretty good. Or you could play the Steward to get $2 and get another vampire. And that would speed you along on thinning with the second bat and on gaining the groundskeepers eventually as well. Is it better to thin now, or is it better to get something that'll help you thin and gain? It's kind of a tough call, but what you do is, I think, actually the worst thing that you could have done with this hand. You don't play the Steward, and you buy a caravan. You mentioned earlier you were going to be worried about that split, so I understand where you're coming from. Maybe you prioritize getting a caravan over a card that's maybe better for your deck if you're worried about them being contested, but let's think about the opponent. He's got a bunch of cultists. Well, he's got a cultist, so he's probably going to have a bunch later. And a Soothsayer. I don't really think that the opponent wants the caravans. I don't think the opponent is going to be contesting you on the caravans, or that you need to worry about the split at all. I mean, cultist decks don't want caravans in them. They're just going to draw them dead. So I don't think that you needed to worry about the caravan, and I think one of those other 2 options would have been quite a bit better than getting the caravan now. But the caravan certainly doesn't hurt the deck, and it does help. So what do you gain with your vampire? You get another caravan. I mean, that is consistent with you worrying about the split, so I understand wanting to pile in on those caravans, but I do think that that ignores some of the context of what the opponent is actually doing. Normally I'd say that, yes, prioritizing caravans like you are is probably pretty good, but given that the opponent probably isn't going to contest them, I think you can build in other ways and come out ahead for it. Alright, so let's see, most of your play is pretty reasonable up until we get to here. So at this point, you end up buying the silver, and I don't actually think that's very good for you. You, leading up to this, have been talking about the total econ in your deck. You have said that, let's see, my deck makes $9 now, so or I think you've mentioned the econ, and you have a plan to get a gold in the next shuffle. Normally, I would applaud you for playing precisely and thinking about the total contents of your deck and what the expected value of your turns is, given what your goals are. But you're not drawing your deck. You're not coming close to drawing your deck. So the total money in your deck really doesn't matter right now until you're getting close to drawing it. So I do think that is a good thought to have, but not yet. So I think you would have been maybe probably better served by just thinning out the copper and the curse and then buying nothing. But you buy the silver, justifying it by increasing the total econ of your deck. That's only true if you do end up drawing the silver. And you're not guaranteed to do that, especially because you need to really aggressively thin because you're being junked at the same time. So you do run the risk of getting too much junk to feasibly line up your trasher with your junk. And if that happens, even though your strategy is much better than his, in my opinion, you could still lose playing it if you play it incorrectly and lose and get snowballed on junk. So I do think that buying the silver was maybe kind of a mistake, but that's okay. I do understand why you did it. You do want to keep hitting 5 after all. Although, that matters a lot less if you have another vampire.
Gotta deal with your own. Oh crap.
So, let's see. You're thinking about how to play this out, and I do think you end up making what I think. Yes, you go ahead and thin some cards out.
I've got 6 properties,
And
6 silvers, so I've got 10 economy.
you're talking
See,
again
everything
about
in
the
there
total
down there.
economy in your deck, which I don't think is
feel like
actually
with
relevant until you have better control of
all
your
the
deck.
extra junk since he's throwing Srmccorkle that in there.
So you're talking about the
Might be
junk that
better
you
off.
get here.
Something through more.
You've got a 6 cost, and you've got $6, and you're thinking about what the best card to add to your deck is. So I want to come back again and say you should really have more than one vampire. You have already talked earlier in the video about how you know that the Groundskeepers are going to be really good for you, and they're going to be your means of catching up if your opponent gets a point lead. And that's true. That's great. But the only reason that this is really good is because you can gain a bunch of Groundskeepers with Vampire. If you couldn't do that, what he's doing, maybe the cultists are pretty bad, but with the Soothsayer slog, that might be better or faster to win the game than what you're doing. I don't know. I haven't thought a whole lot about it, but I do know that the vampires really speed you up quite a bit. And that's the main reason that this deck is good and worth going for, is because you can put a bunch of vampires in, thin really quickly, and get a bunch of Groundskeepers really quickly. So you definitely want that. And I understand that the caravans are helping you too because they're increasing your hand size, but I think they're kind of second best at doing the job of helping you build your deck and cycle than trashing with vampires and gaining with. But you do have a 6 cost hand, and you end up buying a caravan with it, which again I think only makes sense if the split of caravans is a real thing. And I don't think it is here because he's not going for them.
Felt bad.
So let's go ahead and speed things along.
I think I'll go ahead and transition to Groundskeepers and try to get them.
You're talking about transitioning to the Groundskeepers, which is fine. Yeah, this is the time to start buying Groundskeepers. You're thinking about what it is, and you're deciding it's now. And, you know, I don't have any real objections to that. Ideally, you would have another vampire in your deck before you did this. I would say maybe even 2 more vampires would be pretty good. But if you don't have that, sure, it's a fine time to buy Groundskeepers. Alright. Let's speed things along here, and this plays out for a little while. So let's speed to the next real landmark of this game.
Who hasn't even... Yeah, it's too
Alright, so you have
I'm going to
hit $8 in one buy. and you are deciding what to do about that. One of the things that crosses your mind is buying a province, and you do decide not to do that. And I'm just going to say, good, you don't want to do that because remember, the only real two ways you can lose here are if he can pile all the junk into your deck and then come away with a points lead in a 3 pile. That seems like a stretch. Or if he turns it into a province race and you miss province because your deck isn't really built to green very well. That's a much more real threat. So his deck, if he's flooding with golds from Soothsayer, which, by the way, he's not doing a great job of because he keeps drawing his Soothsayer dead, but let's say he was playing his Soothsayer more. If he's flooding with golds from that and he turns it into a province race and you buy into that, that's one of the ways that you could lose. So you consider buying the province and you decide not to do it because it doesn't play into your win condition, but it plays into his. And that was a good decision on your part. What you do, though, is buy a caravan, which is not terrible, but it does lower piles. And I know that losing on a 3 pile here isn't a huge threat because you can get points at the end if you need them, but I also don't think that the caravan was the best card for your deck. I think that the vampire would have been really good, or a groundskeeper, just to get yourself closer to that point where you have a super high point ceiling. But you go with the caravan, so I'm going to call that, a half victory there. I think you didn't make the worst decision, but you didn't make the best one either. Although, actually, right after that, you say, I should have bought a groundskeeper, so I think you realize that as well.
I have no pressure to green, so I guess I still have plenty of time to get groundskeepers.
You say you have no pressure to green, and you are pretty much right in that respect. And I think it's important to understand how important that is and why you have no pressure to green. Your opponent here doesn't have any extra gains. The opponent is, for green cards anyway, the opponent is just playing cultists and treasures and trying to buy a province that way. So they're only going to be able to buy 1 green card a turn. That makes their scoring very predictable, and it means that their endgame position is pretty bad because you have pile control and you can actually score more points than them over the course of the game. So the reason that what the opponent is doing is so bad against your deck is that you're playing the Groundskeepers, and pressure is the key thing to put them in check. If he's not getting a points lead and forcing you to stop buying Groundskeepers and start buying points and making your deck worse, you are just going to vastly outpace his score, the score that he could ever get. So I think you correctly assess that you have no pressure to green and you decide not to do it. So let's see, most of your play is pretty on point for the most part. You make some pretty reasonable decisions.
I think he played it.
You're doing a little bit of thinning. You're gaining some cards that are good for your deck. And then we get to this part in a few turns where you do something I think was a bit careless. It's not a huge strategic misplay, but okay. So those coppers were in your hand, and you plus play all treasures. You've already decided that you're buying a groundskeeper this turn, and that's what you end up doing. But you plus play all treasures, and because of that, you don't get to trash one of these coppers. That's just a little bit of carelessness, but be careful with the play all treasures button. It can lead you to suboptimal decisions. So let's see, you get to this point, and the game has sped up quite a bit. Caravans are empty. I think you have all of them. And ruins are empty, so 1 more pile and it's done. And the opponent has a province. So despite what things look like, you're actually massively ahead here. You're in a really good position to win this game. And because you have Groundskeepers and your deck is consistently hitting 8. So You can buy provinces if you want to, but you've got 4 of them, so if you race on provinces, you're going to get more groundskeeper points than his initiative than his extra province of initiative by having bought them first does. So you're probably in a really good spot. And you say something here about buying your first province. You say, I don't have a choice. And I'm not going to say that you made the wrong choice buying the province. I don't think you had to. You could have bought a duchy or a humble castle, and that would have been fine too. But saying I don't have a choice, I think, is wrong. You absolutely have a choice. The game is 100% in your hands right now. As long as he doesn't get too far ahead. Because he can't empty provinces quickly. You're going to have time to keep building. So you might have actually even considered not buying the province and buying a groundskeeper instead. Because he's not going to pile on you. And you have the option of just keeping your deck reliable and being able to score more points. But buying the province is totally fine as well. I understand wanting the security of the point lead in case you've done a couple of times in a row, but just something to think about. So let's go ahead and speed up to this point.
He's only ever going to be able to gain 1 card a turn.
You point out that he's only ever going to be able to gain 1 card a turn, and because of the points cards that you do have and the point chips and your groundskeepers are ahead on scoring, and it's your turn, so you're about to get even farther ahead on scoring. So yes, you have effectively won this game. There are very few ways you could lose at this point. So I think it's kind of a foregone conclusion that you do win the game because your strategy was better. And let's go ahead and speed up along here just so we know how this actually plays out at a certain point. Oh, the opponent started going for castles. I think that was weird. On their point, I think they just needed to pile provinces, but they were kind of dead either way. So you are at the end of the game, and you have scored some points, and if we speed along here, you decide to go ahead and score some more points on this turn, and you played 4 of these caravans. So what happens next is you play your bat, and it turns into a vampire, and you get some points and get a lead, and then you end up playing the vampire and buying a groundskeeper, and that's the 3rd pile. So you do win the game. So pros to your game. I think that you had a better read on this kingdom than your opponent did. Your opponent went for junking, which is usually good, and cultists and soothsayer, which are both usually good, but I think they're pretty bad together unless you can play the soothsayer early a few times. And you went for something else that you saw to be more powerful, and you just kept your deck clean and played to the groundskeepers, which I think was absolutely the right call. The thing I will say is that you did the right thing, but you didn't do enough of it. If your opponent had been playing a strategy closer to what I think is best, then you would have been contested on things like groundskeepers and vampires and caravans, and then it comes down to speed. So I think that the point I made about you really wanting more than 1 vampire in this deck really applies harder if your opponent is playing something that has a chance of beating you, like your deck. So all in all, I would say that you could have thinned a little faster and gained some more groundskeepers a little bit faster, but I think you played pretty well other than the little nitpicks that we pointed out, and you won the game for it. So congratulations, and thank you for submitting this to our coaching series. Again, if you'd like to have a game of yours analyzed step by step like this, you can submit to the contact information below, and I will see you next time.